Welcome to Talking Points. I'm Esme Murphy. For this edition of Talking Points, we are focusing on Minnesota by the numbers. Some of what we found may surprise you. Minnesotans as a whole are getting older. People here are earning less money. It's dramatically more diverse than it used to be, and compared to other states, more people are moving out of the state than moving in. What does that mean for you? Well, we've got here the State Demographer, Susan Brower, who is in charge of putting all these numbers together. And when I said Minnesotans are getting older, duh, yes, we all know they're getting older, but overall the population is skewing older. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so part of what's happening is the baby boom generation, born between 1946 and 64, of course, are moving into their older ages. And at the same time, we're not having as many babies as we used to have. So on average, the whole state is getting older as those things happen.
And we were talking about the birth rate. Back in 2007, 73,000 babies were born in Minnesota. The latest figure you have for a year is 63,000 or 62,000.
Yeah.
That's a significant difference, isn't it?
Yeah. The biggest cohort of babies born in recent history was in 2006, and we've just seen successively smaller birth cohorts since that time. Right now, Minnesota's fertility rate is 1.7 children per woman of childbearing age, which is below replacement fertility. It means that we're not making as many babies to replace ourselves that we would potentially need.
What was happening in 2006? I mean, that was right before the recession. I'm just trying to think.
That probably has something to do with the size of the parent generation, that you had a lot of potential mothers in that age group.
So more mothers, more babies.
But also people are choosing to have fewer babies, and we're seeing that not only in Minnesota, but across the U.S. and even globally.
I would guess that that's because of cost.
There's a lot of research going into why that's happening. Long term, it reaches much further back than 2007. In part, certainly must have something to do with cost, has to do with preferences, has to do with kind of women's and men's ability to support a full household, the cost of living, and additional children with the jobs that we have.
And also women are in the workplace where they were not,
in past generations. For sure.
One statistic I found really interesting: more people are moving out of Minnesota than moving in. Between 2011 and 2020, Minnesota saw a net loss of 0.6% in population, while Florida, for example, saw a net gain of 7.1%. How does this compare with the rest of the country?
Well, we're in a part of the country in the Midwest where we tend to see net losses to other states. So Wisconsin, for example, Iowa, like Minnesota, tend to see net losses. I will say that there are 100,000 people who move into the state each year and about 101,000 or so that move out. So it's a small net loss each year, but a lot of movement that's going on underneath that loss.
Whereas the Sun Belt states, their population is going through the roof.
Yeah, they're really helped by migration.
I did notice that one state in our region, actually two states that have a positive net growth, were the Dakotas, and especially North Dakota, which has gained of 4% over a decade. Obviously, there was a lot of oil there. And employment as well.
Right. So part of that has to do with really strong economies pulling people in. It's also both of those states are much smaller than Minnesota, so we're talking about smaller numbers moving in than Minnesota would.
And Minnesota is losing fewer people than Wisconsin and Iowa, for those who care. They're all losing people, a net loss, but it's a lesser number, which I thought was really interesting. Older Minnesotans are also moving out of the state of Minnesota, as are younger Minnesotans. What's going on there?
So people tend to move in their 20s, late teens and early 20s. That's where most of the movement happens. It's when they're done with high school, maybe they're moving on to college, maybe they're finding a new job or opportunity elsewhere. That's where we see most of the movement. We also see some movement around retirement age, and we know that people are moving to warmer climates. They're moving to California and Florida and Texas and places
right.
that you know.
And is that, I mean, there's always a debate about this. Is this having to do with taxes at all, do you know? Or, you know,
Yeah.
the Republicans always allege, and to a certain extent it's true, Minnesota does have higher taxes. We tax Social Security
Yeah.
benefits, for example. We still do most of them. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think if you look at most of the people who are moving, they are in their late teens and early 20s.
Okay,
And they're
the
really,
college
they're
age.
shaping the patterns for the state overall. The older adults, sure, some of them are moving for taxes, for tax reasons, but they come back as well.
Okay.
But you have to think about those young people as being the real drivers of migration, and they're probably not thinking
Right.
about taxes too much.
All the numbers that I'm using as I speak to you are your numbers from your reports and also from the Census Bureau. One of the things, let me ask you about this. After decades of growth, the number of working age people between 16 and 64 has flatlined the
Yeah.
last 10 years.
Yeah.
So we do not have a growing workforce. What does that suggest for the future?
So employers are already starting to feel the impact of that, and in some industries it's been really hard to grow because they can't find the workers that they need to be able to increase production or deliver more services. And so it's really been an important kind of dimension of the economy lately, is just how many workers we have available to do what owners want to be able to do with their
And
businesses.
particularly skilled workers?
It's both.
It's both. Even
yeah.
non-skilled workers.
That's right. It's across the spectrum. We're seeing shortages in occupations and industries, whether it's high skill in the healthcare industry, lower skilled in retail, or in food service and accommodation. We're seeing kind of across the board.
One of the most interesting things that I saw in your reports is that in 1960, Minnesota was 97% white.
Yeah.
And in 2020, 76% white. So
That's right.
obviously there's been a dramatic drop in the percentage of white people, and there's been an incredible growth in the number of people we used to call ethnic minorities. I'm not sure that's the right category right now. But the figures show that Latinos, Hispanics, and blacks have gone from less than 50,000 in each group in 1960 to more than 300,000. So there's more than 300,000 Latinos, there are more than 300,000 black people, there are more than 300,000 Asian people, and there are also more than, well, almost 300,000 people who consider themselves of a mixed background. That's big.
Yeah. And it will continue to grow. So right now there are about 1.3 million people of color in the state of Minnesota, about 24%. And that number will continue to grow because the parenting generation is very diverse. And so we know that our babies and our nurseries are more diverse as well. So we know that will continue.
And those groups are also having more babies per family.
In some cases, that's the case, but not always. It really depends on how new an immigrant, if it's a new immigrant family coming to the U.S., typically the first generation has family size preferences that look maybe like their home country. And then when they come to the U.S. by the second generation, their preferences for family size look very much like native-born Americans.
They see the U.S. prices and think,
yeah, maybe.
I also found a statistic that was really interesting to me, that the median household income for Minnesota between 2019 and 2024 actually went down from $91,000 to $87,000 in 2024. We're still above the national average, but the national average has stayed flat. Whereas Minnesota, there was actually a decrease. And there's been a lot of talk in the past 4, 5, 6 years about inflation and how much money people have, how much spending power they have. I know it's a small amount, 91 to 87,000, relatively speaking, but that's significant because that's just an average.
Yeah, so it's showing us what the median, the middle of the distribution looks like. And so it is, I think, somewhat surprising Although given what inflation has looked like over the last few years, it's just that income growth has not kept up with inflation, and that is what many people are experiencing and really understand right now.
But it seems like it has kept up, though, in other parts of the country.
Yeah, that measure can be, there's a lot going on underneath that measure. So part of what's happening is the number, the household size impacts the median household income. And so if you have smaller and smaller households due to aging, I don't know.
Yeah.
We want to go all into that.
It's you know, when we look at some of the political changes that have taken place over 10 years, I think that's a very interesting statistic to show why people were dissatisfied with the status quo and wanted to change because they felt they had less spending power.
Yeah, and that's absolutely, it's a number that has remained really flat over time in Minnesota and fairly flat in the U.S. overall as well.
Okay.
But what we're seeing in the last 5 years or so is a very slight decline in Minnesota, and that.
Overall, when I read your reports, and also just as I said, I do a lot of political stories. The number of members of Congress, we just squeaked by the last time,
so
barely,
close.
to keep our 8
That's right.
members of the House of Representatives. Obviously, will always have 2 senators, but it looks like Minnesota is kind of stalled.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen good, strong growth in the last couple of years, 2023 and 2024. Most of that was kind of buoyed by international migration.
Post-pandemic.
Post-pandemic, but we may, kind of given what's happened with immigration in recent years, we may not see that same level of growth that we've seen recently.
Interesting point, because in other words, Minnesota's population has grown along with the immigrants, the people who come into the state.
That's right.
And including those who come from different countries.
Yeah, and that's been a really important source of growth for Minnesota in the past few years, and will continue to be an important source of growth as we have fewer and fewer babies and as we age.
But as immigration policies change, and they are changing as we speak, that's not going to be as significant, do you think?
Yeah, we'll have to see long-term what happens. Right now, there's been a restriction on the flow of people, whether it's students, whether it's high-skilled, doctors or lower-skilled folks. It's going to have an impact on Minnesota. It'll be really important.
Well, listen, thank you so much for coming by. I think this is so interesting, to look at these numbers, especially some of the racial statistics are just, wow. I mean, Minnesota has changed an awful lot in the past few generations. So thank you very much for coming by.
Thanks for having me.
And that does it for this edition of Talking Points. As always, please email me with comments and suggestions. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Esme Murphy, WCCO News.